It is time for Deep Waters here on ProBox TV, your boxing channel, where we take a deeper dive into boxing's top stories. I'm George DeMatteis, and I'm joined by the champions. Chris Algieri here in studio, and joining us is the Magic Man, Paulie Malignaggi. And fellas, I need you to indulge me a little bit here because I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. And there is a house in boxing that seems to be on the decline, like House Tyrell in the show. And that house is led by a couple of twins, the Charlo twins. Now, earlier this week, Jermall Charlo, who is younger by 1 minute, was arrested in Texas for DWI. And when you consider that his last fight was unimpressive against Jose Bermudez Jr. at catchweight, and before that, hadn't fought in 3 years or almost 3 years, and just recently got his WBC middleweight belt stripped. Meanwhile, for Jermell, did not look impressive against Canelo Alvarez and may have sullied the name of the great House of Charlo in the world of boxing. So, Chris, let me start with you here and ask you, what do you make of the recent troubles, we'll put it that way, of the House of Charlo?
First off, I do not watch Game of Thrones,
okay.
So I didn't get any of those references. Yeah, I mean, listen, there's been an obvious decline in these guys' career for a while now, plagued with inactivity, with injuries, pulling out of fights, extracurricular activities, I'll put it that way, illegal activities, certain things of that nature. But again, you know, the state of boxing is in a place where a lot of these guys don't have to defend their titles, but still hold on to them. So yeah. They have been finally, Jermall has finally been stripped, you know, but it was, I think I counted up yesterday, 35 months without defending the title before he was finally stripped. And Mauricio Sulaiman cited this activity that happened outside of the ring as why. I'm like, well, you should have been stripped a long time ago if you ask me, if we're going by boxing standards and being able to defend your title and allow other fighters to fight for these titles. So, you know, finally he's been stripped. You know, he's been going through a lot apparently based on, you know, his last couple fights, last couple years, some of the incidences and that he's had outside of the ring, you know, the big slap from Caleb Plant, looking, you know, like he's been abusing possibly drugs and alcohol, you know, throughout, you know, this whole time as well, and then obviously culminating in this
arrest midweek,
altercation and getting arrested. So hopefully, I mean, he can get everything back together because, you know, he's down a very dangerous spiral, it seems, and, you know, hopefully he has people around him who are, you know, looking out for his best interest.
You're at a part of your life during your boxing career where you're making all this money and you're not going to make this money ever again, you know? So you're hoping that you can be smart with it, not burn it in the way, in ignorant ways, and sort of set yourself up as the best way possible going forward. And that's not really happening right now. You know, I think he's, you know, by behaving the way he's behaved, he's burning a lot of bridges. So therefore, you know, it's difficult to, you know, sort of set yourself up later for after boxing if you burn bridges like this. I don't know. It's a little bit sad to see, a little bit disappointing.
And it's unfortunate for sure, as you mentioned, Paulie. I mean, Jermall is 33-0. He's 22 knockouts, so he's not a bad fighter. He's a really good fighter. He's a world champion.
Wildly talented and has been a dominant champion for a very long time with some fantastic performances against very, very tough opposition throughout. But, I mean, that seems so long ago at this point. You know, he has been active. You know, he said he came back against Benavidez, which I actually didn't think he looked bad. It was just a guy that, you know, isn't a top guy. He wasn't in the same weight class. But, you know, it just shows you how talented he is and how physically gifted he can be. You know, but yeah, it's a shame. I mean, it's a great story. You have twin brothers who are world champions at the same time in weight classes right next to each other. It's phenomenal, really. It's a real shame that, you know, the fall from grace was so sudden.
Yeah, and WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman says that now Jermall is not at 160 anymore, super middleweight, which we know that's, you know, we're getting into Canelo territory there, 168. Paulie, what do you think could have triggered Sulaiman to say something about him moving up to 168, being a super middleweight, and then obviously the whole situation surrounding him being stripped of the WBC middleweight title?
Yeah, that one is your guess as good as mine. That one is weird because I felt like he should have probably been stripped ages ago. I don't know. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to have let it go this long. I mean, where did you expect it was going to go? If you enable people, you're going to make them worse, not better. You know, this was this whole process between Charlo's team and then also the sanctioning body and everything else all enabled this kind of behavior. There's no consequences, and when there's no consequences, you're enabled. Especially, it's very dangerous when you enable full-blown adults, because then it becomes really, really problematic, because then there's no rescue for them out of the difficult situations that they get themselves into.
So if you had any advice to give the Jermall Charlo, what would that be? Any advice, Chris, that you would give to Jermall Charlo to get out of this situation, kind of maybe even resurrect his boxing career?
I mean, he's a grown man. He can do whatever he wants to do with his life. If this is what he chooses to do, then that's on him. I know not anywhere near his circle to be able to speak to him, but it's, if anything, I would just speak as a fan and as someone that respects him as a fighter. I would love to see him be able to come back and make another run because of the talent that he possesses.
You wonder if guys like this have really people that are looking out for their best interest around them, that they actually trust and they will listen to. I don't know. Sometimes guys like this, they don't listen to people around them anyway, or they're so far gone. They've had so many enablers that now they're not going to listen to good advice. But you hope that somebody around him is smart enough to get it by. And I know from the grapevine, I've been around the Charlos, they have not grown up like with this, like, quote unquote hood mentality or anything like that. I mean, they grew up pretty well, and then they were hard workers in the gym. They were good kids. So the fact that this is all happening all of a sudden in the last few years, that's just going down the wrong path, man. And it's like, you hope that they can, overcome this, especially Jermall, but also, Jermell too has had issues with domestic violence and whatnot. So you just hope that they can overcome it, because I will say from my own experience, you never make this kind of money again. So you need to be smart going forward, because, you want to make sure you live as comfortably as you did when you were fighting after boxing as well.
And Champ, to your point, like when you've been the man for so long, the people around you, like you said, they might not have the best interests, and they're enablers. And you surround yourself with a lot of yes men or people that weren't there before you made it. It's very easy to fall into a rut where everything you say goes, and you don't have any checks and balances. And that's why it's important to have family and people around you that matter, or having faith, having something else to look up to. But you never know. Every man's different.
All right, we'll take a quick break here on Deep Waters and talk about Jermell Charlo and his future in boxing here on ProBox TV, your boxing channel. Ooh, best live fight series in all of boxing, Wednesday night fights, May 22nd. And I've been trying to say this name, get it right. Baturjan Jukembayev versus Ivan Redkach. I've been practicing that all day. If you want to make some money on this fight card and the big title fight this weekend, you definitely want to check out Jim Rodriguez on The Better Side.
Well, it's an international flair to The Better Side this week. We're going down under to Perth, Australia. The IBF Lightweight Championship in play between the old veteran Vasiliy Lomachenko and the homestanding Aussie George Kambosos Jr. So what is the better side of this? Well, Sportsbetting.AG will tell you that Kambosos is the underdog, right? Plus 500, while Lomachenko minus 800 favorite. No interest whatsoever. So we got to find some creative ways to make that money. So here's the better side of this. I call this my pizza and beer money bets, right? Not going to put a big amount of money on this, but I think we're going to get a nice return. So we break down how the fight's going to happen. If you've been watching us here on ProBox TV, it's been the Matrix, which is Lomachenko. He's able to avoid a lot of punches, while Kambosos is more of the brawler. Center of the ring, swinging for the fences. I think Loma's going to set a trap for him, lure him in the middle of the ring, and then catch him late. So, will the fight go the distance? No, that's plus 200 at sportsbetting.ag. Also, how about Lomachenko by knockout, TKO, or disqualification? That is huge. It's plus 240. Much better than laying that 800, right? And finally, will the fight go under 10.5 rounds? Plus 300 over at sportsbetting.ag. Listen, both guys have lost to Devin Haney, although I think Loma may have won or at least gotten a draw out of that fight. And Loma hasn't been in the ring for about a year. It's almost kind of a career-defining moment for both guys. Lomachenko needs this to keep on going at 36 years old, and I think the two-time Olympic gold medal winner is going to do it. So we're going to go Lomachenko by knockout, TKO, or DQ. That's going to be at plus 240. The fight will not go the distance. That's plus 200. That's over your money. That's double your money. And we're going to go under 10.5 rounds, plus 300. That's the juicy one there. I'm Jim Rodriguez. Of course, that's the better side.
Thank you very much, Jim. I don't have pizza and beer money. I got McDonald's and Coke money. Coke like the drink, Coca-Cola, okay? I know South Florida Coke means something else, but I'm talking about the drink Coca-Cola, okay? That's the guy. Moving on. So here's the tale of the tape between Lomachenko and Kambosos Jr. for the IBF title. And the winner is looking like they might face WBC champion Shakur Stevenson. Don't want to miss Deep Waters, the analysis of that fight between Kambosos and Lomachenko. It is fantastic. All right, let's get on to Jermell Charlo. I always got to make sure I clarify that. Jermell Charlo, as we continue our talk about the fall of the House of Charlo. Jermell Charlo coming off a very disappointing fight and result against Saul Canelo Alvarez. He's also been someone that has had issues with inactivity. What do you make of Jermell Charlo's situation, Chris, and how it could be impacting his career, especially coming after that disappointing loss to Alvarez?
Well, I mean, Jermell seems to be a little more on the straight and narrow than his brother Jermall. Not entirely, but obviously he's been more active. Again, another extremely talented champion who has reigned for a very long time and has been in some fantastic fights, beating some very, very good champions throughout the years. But against Canelo Alvarez, he really just didn't show up. He didn't show up. He didn't try to win. Put on an abysmal performance, one that has really, really set him back in terms of how he's seen by the public. And with that kind of performance, it's really tough to go out there and look like. It's one thing to go out there and not be able to compete. It's another thing to go out there and not even try to compete. And I think that's kind of what the fan base is looking at that. Granted, he did jump up 2 weight classes to fight Canelo Alvarez, one of the best fighters in the world. I think he needs to get back into the ring, get back in the win column, get closer to his weight class. I don't think we're going to see him at 54 ever again. Moving up 2 weight classes at the age of 33, that's another thing. The Charlo brothers, they're aging. 33, I always talk about that number. That's the age. That's when everything starts to change physically. Going back down to weight, making weight becomes tougher. Training hard consistently becomes tougher. Not getting injury, not having injuries, sustaining injuries becomes tougher. 33 is that number. That's that age. So now that he's here, I think campaigning at 160 is probably a great idea. It's not only because obviously he's aging and he already fought at 68, but because it's a bit of a barren weight class.
Right.
And he would be one of the bigger names, if not the biggest name fighting at 160 compared to the other champions that are there. And based on his past and where he's been in terms of titles and rankings, he could probably get a title shot pretty easily. So I would see him campaigning at 160, but I do believe he needs to get back into the public eye with a win first, and then look to campaign at 160 and looking for one of those title fights.
Yeah, Jermell is also another one who's had some issues even with the law. I think he had the domestic violence incident, the arrest as well. Some trouble outside the ring, trouble inside the ring, of course, with, he's been more active than his brother, but the Canelo Alvarez performance didn't really do anything positive for the way his outlook or the way he's viewed, his brand, the perception of him as a fighter. I know the champ, Chris, mentioned that he could go to 160. First of all, you got to see if there's a desire, really. The fact that this guy showed up and didn't want to fight before he made that check. Obviously, he was getting that check after the fight, but can you really trust him to give any kind of effort going forward? Because now he's made that check. Now he's got that kind of money. You know what I mean? I don't know. Again, the same thing applies to him, really. You got to make sure you live correctly and intelligently so that you can continue to be comfortable as you were during your boxing career, even after your boxing career. I don't know if I see him beating any of the top middleweights. The middleweight division is slowly starting to leak into some good fighters. It was barren for a while, but I wouldn't pick him against Janabek. I wouldn't pick up against Carlos Adames. Those are 2 guys off the top of my head. I don't know if Jermell can beat the top guys anymore, even at 160.
All right. We're going to talk about 160 in the middleweight division on the other side here on Deep Waters on ProBox TV. Welcome back to Deep Waters here on ProBox TV, your boxing channel. All right, time to talk about the middleweight division, where specifically Jermell Charlo fits into that. By the way, interesting quote. Someone said once that hair was afraid to grow on Marvin Hagler's head. That's how mean he was. Marvin Hagler, obviously one of the great middleweight champions of the world. And we were talking about how Charlo fits into the middleweight division. So, Paulie, let me start with you here. Where do you think Charlo fits in? And is middleweight kind of maybe on the rebound with some of these fighters there, even though over the last few years has been kind of barren?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if he wants to continue to fight, there's going to be a place for him. He's a former world champion. He's a former undisputed world champion. So there's definitely going to be a place for him. As far as where he fits, I don't know, man. I guess the Lara fight is interesting because they come from the same gym. They come from the same stable, really. Both having worked with Ronnie Shields for so many years, and probably have had spent numerous hours, countless weeks, months, and years in the gym together and sparred. So that's interesting. Both are, obviously Lara is much older, but again, Charlo also hasn't been looking exactly stellar himself. It's a little bit of a barren weight class, but it's picking back up. I think Adames is fresh blood. I mean, Adames should have been champion a while ago. Charlo should have already been stripped a while ago. And Adames is a rough character over there to deal with. Janabek over at Top Rank, you don't know if that fight can even be made. But Adames is a fight that, he's with PBC, could be made, but I wouldn't like Charlo's chances against Adames. Adames is hungry, he's skilled, and he's a rough one to deal with.
And Adames just being elevated from interim champion to full champion after the WBC stripped Jermell Charlo. So, Chris, what do you make of the current state of the middleweight division, and who could be a good opponent for Charlo?
Well, the issue is I don't know the current state of Jermell Charlo. So that's why I said that he needs to come back and get a win. We got to see him back in the ring, and like to your point, champ, you got to see if he still has that desire to train hard, come in shape, and then look to actually perform and win a fight. I was actually impressed with his brother Jermall, who came off of how many years absent. Yeah. Obviously fought a much smaller guy, but fought a very tough guy. Benavidez Jr. is still tough. He fights up. He was sparring with his brother for the fight as well, getting prepared for it. So he's used to a bigger guy. But I thought he still looked good. Jermall, again, these guys are super talented. And so even when they're not at their 100%, they can still be a problem, still be competitive with a lot of these guys. But, I just think about how good they were once upon a time. And if Jermell can return to close to what his past form was, honestly, I think he could beat every one of those guys. I mean, Janabek would be the most difficult for sure. He's a very difficult style, I think, and I actually rate him a lot higher than most people do. But Lara's 41 years old, and I don't know how much he has left in him in terms of being able to hold on to that title. And Carlos Adames, yes, absolutely, champ. I agree with you. He's a super, super tough guy, super tough out. The guy is a bull. I've been around him for years, actually. But he is new to this. He is new to this championship material. He was elevated after winning an interim title. But I remember I called the fight when he fought Teixeira, and he just did not perform when he needed to. That was supposed to be his world title fight, and he came up with a goose egg, man. He really did not perform, and he lost to a guy that probably should have never been world champion. So there is an opportunity for Adames to, a little too much too soon, or just catch them at the right time in terms of where they're going, in terms of their careers. So, but it really just depends on what level of desire that Jermell has and what level of physicality he has left. But again, if he can get close to anywhere where he was in his past form, he's still a formidable guy, even at 160 with the landscape right now.
The big thing that the champ just said is if he can get back to the way he was. If he can get back to the way he was, I agree, he beats all those guys. I just don't think he gets back to the way he was. I don't think he's anywhere near it. If my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle too, but she's never uncle, So if Charlo were to be what the Charlo we've known, that was, unifying the titles at 154, that guy at 160 would easily, not easily, but he would be able to unify those 160-pound titles if he were given the opportunity. But the Charlo that I know right now, Charlo that we've gotten used to, is the one that's getting arrested with domestic violence incidents and then not trying and just laying an egg on in the Canelo fight. That guy, I can't see him having even the motivation to get past a hungry guy like Adames or even a rough character like Janabek, who I don't think is as good as advertised, but he's still capable. And even Lara at 40 years old seems to be fighting with more desire than Charlo. We'll see.
And it appears that Jermell Charlo's performance against Canelo might have ruined both Jermall and Jermell's reputation, so they both have to kind of fight back
it's
in order to
tough
get it
when
back
you wear
real
the
quick.
same face. It's tough when you wear the same face and you have very similar names too.
Yeah. All right, we'll continue our discussion on the middleweight division on the other side here on Deepwater. Welcome back to Deep Waters. As we take a deeper dive into boxing's top stories, we'll continue our discussion about middleweights. And Chris, who is a contender that's on the rise at 160? Maybe coming from 154, maybe? Who do you see as a contender on the rise that could get a belt at 160?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with Tszyu and Virgil Ortiz. Virgil Ortiz, listen, I think he's going to be as high as 68, even 175 at one point. I've been hearing about him for years. He's very young. He still seems like he's growing. Even in his return fights at 54, they weren't exactly at 54. He was fighting at catch weights above 54. So, I know he cuts a lot of weight. He's coming down from he's a bigger bodied guy. So I do believe he's going to end up at 60 at one point. Tszyu, I'm not sure. I mean, eventually, sure, but I don't think he needs to anytime soon. He's not as tall as some of these other guys, and height plays a big part in terms of how far you can go in terms of weight classes, especially as you get past 147. I'm gonna throw out a wild card for you, Errol Spence.
Oh.
I don't know. I think Errol might jump right over 54.
Okay.
He is a huge guy. He's the biggest guy I've ever fought in the ring. I've never been in the ring with someone quite as large as him. I don't know how he made 47 for as long as he did. And, you see videos of him now, pictures of him now, he looks all of 185 pounds. So, and he's even said, like, when he got into that Twitter beef, that X beef with Ryan, he's like, let's fight at 160.
Yeah.
Why would he say that? If he was thinking about fighting at 54, or if he couldn't handle 160. And I've heard Jim stories about him sparring with light heavyweights and cruiserweights and whatnot, and not weighing much less than them either. So, I think there's an opportunity for Spence there. If he does decide to return anytime soon, then he could return at 160. I don't see him returning at 154 unless he has a legitimate title opportunity. In which case, even if he does get a title there, he will likely go up to 160 for some of those other titles as well. So, listen, middleweight is always going to be interesting. Even though we've been barren for a couple years now, there's always transitions. And 54 kind of reminds me of like 140. Where it's almost like a leapfrog division where you got those lightweights who are moving towards welterweight, but they take a pit stop and they make some great fights sometimes. And the weight class, similar to how it is right now, can actually be a stellar weight class. 54 is now having a little, it's having a moment. And middleweight is barren, and 68 is great. So a lot of times that's what happens. You kind of have like a desert in between two great weight classes, and that's what's happening in middleweight right now. But guys always transition, and new guys come up. So there's a lot of opportunity at middleweight in the future.
All right, Paulie, who do you see is the next contender at 160? I
could even see Crawford going up there. He's been talking about fighting Eubank at 160. That would be a big fight in England. And I'm sure the UK with their amazing fans would love to have Crawford there. The Eubank fight has been discussed. It's an interesting little tidbit with Bo Mack having trained both guys. Obviously, he's been with Crawford since the amateurs, but he also recently worked with Eubank and had a terrific performance in Eubank's fight against Liam Smith. I can see that. It's interesting, Errol Spence, too, as the champ said, that's an interesting one, too, because I can remember a former Spence opponent, Kell Brook, going to middleweight, but he ended up fighting against Gennady Golovkin, who was one of the hardest punchers in the middleweight division. But I tell you what, he was doing pretty well against Golovkin for a couple of rounds, man. Even Kell Brook, who in England, basically they were the same grumblings about Brook in England as they were about Spence in the United States, in that he was so big for the weight and couldn't make the weight and whatnot. So it was always interesting. Ended up going up against one another in the welterweight division, but having seen the way Brook performed against Golovkin, who is a monster, a generational kind of fighter, Brook did pretty well in that way. So I could see Spence, especially with a 160-pound division that's not as tough as it was back then, doesn't have the monster of a Golovkin back then, now that it had back then. I can see Spence also trying his hand at 160. But you also have to see what Spence has left, really. Everybody still has that question mark. It's the same as the Charlos, problem outside the ring, crashing cars and all kinds of stuff, beating up against Crawford. So we got to see that as well. But yes, he's one of the possibilities.
Chris, Paulie, thank you very much for your time. We always appreciate your insights, dropping knowledge on the sweet science. And don't forget, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Deep Waters only on ProBox TV.